Afghanistan was facing a severe humanitarian crisis before the weekend quakes. The healthcare system relies on foreign aid, but since the Taliban took over, much of it has been halted, and concerns over restrictions on women has seen donors pull back. Now a series of earthquakes and aftershocks have hit the western city of Herat and its surroundings. Taliban officials have been visiting the disaster zone. They say well over 2,000 people have lost their lives. Volunteers have been pulling out victims, both dead and alive. Aid agencies have appealed for the international community to come forward, but only a handful of countries have publicly offered support. They include neighbouring China and Pakistan. Those who survived the quakes face an unbearable situation in dealing with the death and destruction. Others who've been digging for hours on end, searching for neighbours and loved ones, have been mostly left empty-handed.
I was sitting in our house. The girls were playing. One was our neighbor's and one was mine. And suddenly smoke and debris hit me from above like rain or hail falling on top of us. We were buried under the sand. My head was hurt. My daughter was crying. I wanted her brothers to take her out, but no one was listening to me. She died, and my other daughter is lost.
We came here early in the afternoon and were working with shovels until the middle of the night. We took out several dead bodies. 3 of them were little children. They had just come from school. One of them died in the street and 2 others in their home.
Well, as rescue operations continue, the World Health Organization's emergency response team in Afghanistan says casualties from the disaster are only expected to rise.
We are expecting more deterioration, not just in health, but in other aspects that will definitely impact the health of the Afghans, limiting the services, limiting access to the health services, and probably more morbidity and mortality over the coming period if the funds and the resources are not made available for humanitarian work that was never and will be needed in the coming period for Afghanistan.
Correspondent Ali Latifi is in the capital, Kabul. Firstly, give us an idea of the extent of destruction from the people you've been speaking to.
You're talking about entire villages having been destroyed, and these are villages in more remote areas of Herat province that were experiencing a lot of insecurity in the final years of the former government that didn't get as much development and as much assistance because of that. And so you're talking about at least 1,300 homes destroyed, many of those across 13 villages in a single district of Herat. And then even in the city, you know, Herat is one of the most bustling, most active, most vibrant cities in the country. And people have been saying that for the last few days, it's essentially empty other than people trying to get assistance or like trying to reach people in the district. You know, that sort of market atmosphere, that sort of social atmosphere does not exist in the city right now because people are still afraid of aftershocks and they're still dealing with the trauma and trying to figure out how to help their family, their friends, both in the city and also in the districts.
A quake killed over 1,000 last year in Afghanistan. There have been decades of conflict. As a result, you point out houses are poorly built. We've seen the pictures of pure rubble. In a place that's prone to quakes, it sounds like a death trap.
It is, but you also have to remember that you're talking about an area of the country that doesn't necessarily have a lot of experience with earthquakes. Herat is not one of those places where, you know, when you think of natural disasters in Herat, I would imagine you would think of flooding, drought, things like that. You don't really think of earthquakes. When you think of earthquakes, you think, you know, more towards the east of the country or more towards the north of the country. So I think that also had something to do with it. You know, a lot of these structures probably weren't built with earthquakes in mind, even in the city. And also, as I said, because the people are not used to it, the fear is even greater. You know, this is why you have people sleeping in tents. This is why you have people not wanting to go back to their homes and still sleeping outside as much as they can, or trying to basically just not be indoors as much as possible. Because, you know, if you're talking about even a city like Kabul, they can deal with earthquakes. It's like being from California, you know what happens. But when you're talking about somewhere like Herat, they have such little experience with something like this.
But Ali, how much can you put the blame on the Taliban government? Because people are very wary of dealing directly with them, of supporting them, and the global response has so far been slow.
Yeah, but just because you don't like a government doesn't mean you shouldn't be helping people, who are suffering, right? And the issue is that aid has been being cut back in Afghanistan, not only since, the Islamic Emirate returned to power, which was a political decision, but over the last few months, we've seen that because of financial issues around the world, the WFP, the World Health Organization, the ICRC have all had to limit their projects and their aid and assistance in Afghanistan. And these are purely financial decisions. Joe Biden can find $800 million in emergency military aid for Israel, but the ICRC had to cut assistance to funding to 25 government-run hospitals, including one in Herat, just a month ago. So, you're talking about the lives of people, not politics.
Well, let's keep talking about figures. The UN released $5 million in emergency aid Sunday. How far will that go?
I mean, again, you're talking about at least 1,300 homes destroyed, up to 4,000 people injured. I mean, the numbers keep going back and forth, but whatever it is, it's thousands, right? And you're talking about people who, and it's very simple to see the physical devastation because there's video, there's photos, people who will have to rebuild their entire lives. They will have to rebuild their homes. They will have to, figure out the healthcare and, for those who are severely injured, the long-term impact of that healthcare and the costs and all of that. So, $5 million when you're talking about thousands of people affected, and more than 1,000 homes destroyed and, entire villages leveled, it's really not that much money in the grand scheme of things.
And there's also the fact that 15 million Afghans go to bed hungry every night, according to the World Food Programme, which, as you mentioned, was forced to cut its food aid to Afghanistan last month. Again, it's a case of no donors. How do you convince the international community to do more?
I mean, they will say that it's just a matter of finances, right? They will say that we don't have money, the world on the whole is on this economic downturn. But of course, they're finding money for Ukraine, they're finding money for Israel right now. And I think that the number one thing that, all of these donors, that the entire world needs to remember is that just because you don't like a government that you also help bring to power, to be quite honest, but just because you don't like a government does not mean that the people should be suffering, right? Because the people are not the government. The people did not elect this government. The people did not choose this government. The people are trying to live with whatever the international community doesn't like about this government is a lot of the things that the people themselves don't like about it. And so not only are they having to live under, restrictions, but then they're also suffering financially and economically. And then, natural disasters happen all over the world. There's no way to prevent them. And so to know that, your suffering is greater because the rest of the world doesn't like the government that it played a role in bringing back to power, it's quite unfair.
It's a very tricky situation. Ali, thank you very much for being on the show today, and thanks for your time.